Two Cases for the Doctor. From Sandy's selection by Steele. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Son of the Exiles. Two Cases for the Doctor. Sandy behind the plough again. Uncle invalided, moping at the house with a heavy, thick muffler round his neck, coughing and complaining of cold and a sore lip. He had complained of a sore lip on and off for months. The pain was getting unbearable, he said, and declared he would have to go to the hospital or see a doctor about it. Kate wished to heavens he would go anywhere so long as he didn't return any more. She had come to regard Uncle as a nuisance and a serious hindrance to Sandy. Women are so changeable. Not so Sandy himself. He had no desire to lose Uncle. The bonds of kinship were still strong. Besides, Sandy was forgiving and sympathetic. He took Uncle in hand and patched him up, bathed and poulticed the afflicted part, and sat up late in the night, humouring and keeping him company. One evening Sandy applied a little farmer's friend to Uncle's lip to relieve the pain, and for 5 or 6 minutes you would have thought a snake was coiled round Uncle's leg. He danced about the room with his hand over his mouth, only removing it to swear and shout for water. Both kerosene tins were empty, and Uncle kicked one against the slabs and the other he sent flying close to Kate's head. Then he bolted out the door and made for the gully. Sandy stared aghast for several moments, his big heart heaving with concern and compassion. Then he turned to Kate and, with pathos in his voice, asked her not to laugh. Uncle got worse every day, till, at last, there was scarcely any living in the house with him. One evening Sandy heard that Dr. Anderson was setting a limb for Morrissey, 3 miles down the creek. He jumped on one of the old mares and rode down to Morrissey's. On his way home, Dr. Anderson called at Sandy's selection and overhauled Uncle. A nice man was Dr. Anderson, or Kate reckoned he was anyway. He shook hands with Kate. He had the name of being clever, too. Everyone on the creek said he was, and there must have been 8 or 9 living there altogether. "Cancer," he said, after a careful examination of Uncle's lip. "Have to have it cut out." And his big sympathetic eyes looked steadily into Uncle's little grey ones through a pair of gold-rimmed specs. Uncle never flinched. "It'll be rather painful," the doctor exclaimed, "and I'll have to put you under chloroform." Uncle flinched then and became apprehensive. "Couldn't you do it without chloroform?" he stammered. The doctor said he could, would rather do it so, in fact, if Uncle thought he could stand it. Uncle never displayed such nerve before. "Stand it all right," he said, seating himself on a box and inviting the doctor to begin at once. The latter smiled. "I'll be here tomorrow," he said. "Meanwhile, your son here," meaning Sandy, who stood gloomily by, "if he has a razor, might shave your lip." Sandy had a razor, an heirloom. It was frequently used for shaving greenhide. And when the doctor came again, Uncle's top lip, a long, thin one that hung like a board in a calf's nose, was scraped as bare as a boot. Everything was ready for the operation. Kate provided warm water and cloths. Sandy left the plough to come in and look on, and Uncle submitted himself bravely. The doctor took off his coat, and Sandy groaned. The doctor fossicked in a leather bag and produced a pair of bright scissors, which he carefully wiped. Uncle turned very white, but kept calm. "Now put your lip out," said the doctor. Uncle contorted his features till his lip projected like the peak of a policeman's cap. Then the doctor pushed back his white stiff cuffs, reached out, and, like clipping a piece of cardboard, snipped a V-shaped piece from Uncle's lip. Uncle clenched his fists and quivered all over. "You're a Briton," the medico said. "Did it hurt?" "Not much," Uncle answered, large tears rushing from his eyes. The wound was bathed and patched with sticking plaster, and the rest of the day Uncle lay on the sofa, reflecting on his fate and the uselessness of life generally. In 4 days Dr. Anderson called again, and cheerfully examined the patient. The sticking plaster, he found, had mostly left the lip, poked off by the stubble that had grown. "You must have another shave," he said, "or the plaster'll never stick. I'll be back again in about 2 hours." And he prepared to depart. Tears came into Uncle's eyes as he shifted restlessly on the sofa. "Who's going to shave me?" he asked. "Oh, he can do it again," the doctor replied, nodding towards Sandy. Uncle turned his head as slowly as a wounded bear might, and rested his eyes full on Sandy, who stood motionless at the fireplace, looking the very temple of tenderness. "Well then," he said in a firm voice, "I want chloroform." A glorious day. There had been heavy rain on the creek, and the air was crisp and clear. No haze hung round the mountains, everything bright and cheerful. The bush was at its best. Uncle was about, quite recovered, quite himself again. All his uselessness and inactivity had returned. Sandy was opening the last land. He had just erected a stake with paper fastened to the head of it, a mark to go by, and was jumping the plough into line when his eye rested on a flag in the shape of a white skirt flying at the humpy. Sandy flung the plough down and, regardless of the horses, tore over the ploughed ground and was at the humpy in a few bounds. He rushed from it again and raced wildly round in search of Uncle. Uncle was in his nest. Uncle only caught the first words of what Sandy said, but he heard enough. He raised himself quickly and stared in amazement. "Here, no, send me, let me go," he shouted after Sandy as the latter raced back to the plough. Sandy threw the harness from the horses, dragged the mare after him and shoved her into an old spring cart housed under a tree at the back of the humpy. Then, jumping in, recklessly rattled down the creek at the risk of breaking his neck. Uncle stared after Sandy till he became restless, then walked about, now and again pausing to glance at the deserted humpy where the white skirt was still flying. Uncle was agitated. An hour passed. Still Uncle walked up and down. "Confound it!" he muttered. "What the devil did he want leaving me here for?" He thought he heard his name called. "My God!" And he looked up and listened, but it was only his imagination. Another hour nearly spent. Uncle became remorseful. He reproached himself. "What the devil did I want coming back here at all for?" he whined, then lost himself in reverie. When he woke up and looked round again, the horse and cart were standing before the humpy. Sandy was there too, hurrying big Mrs. McNevin and a calico bundle indoors. Uncle was relieved. Presently Sandy sauntered towards Uncle. When halfway he stood and leaned on the fence. He looked lost. Uncle approached him. "Well?" he whispered apprehensively. Sandy didn't answer. His face was grave. A heavy load seemed to be on his mind. He sighed audibly. Then Uncle too leaned on the fence, and both were silent, motionless, till Mrs. McNevin showed herself. "Come, Sandy, man," she called lustily. "Come and see your bairn. Do you ne'er hear the squeals of it?" Sandy gave a bound and could scarcely keep his feet in the haste he made to reach the humpy. Uncle left next day. He wouldn't stay any longer on Sandy's selection, Uncle couldn't stand excitement or a baby in the house. That's why he never got married. So he told Sandy and Mrs. McNevin. End of Two Cases for the Doctor from Sandy's selection by Steele Rudd. Recording by Son of the Exiles.